It's always so difficult to have a panel like this discuss a topic like this after two presentations like the two we just saw. And to Alice, I would have a note here. I'm reading The Guardian. Miley Cyrus is being sued over allegations that she and the co-writers of her 2023 single, Flowers, copied portions of Bruno Mars' 2013 song, When I Was Your Man. So there's just a little food for thought there on this. Political leadership. This is really hard. It reminds me of my days in grad school, where Sir Michael Lee would often talk about the profoundly important role that leadership played in the creation of the EU after such a disastrous 21st century, or I'm sorry, first half of the 20th century. And so how do we talk about this? There's a lot of different angles. We can talk about leadership in democratic versus non-democratic settings, leadership at certain times and places, what kind of leadership enjoys the most legitimacy within an organization or a social group, and how does leadership hope to achieve some measure of legitimacy externally? So we can go on and on. I thought we might try to have this discussion touching on two themes. In the first section, maybe we could discuss the leader and leadership itself, and then segue to some reflections on the features of society that attract or produce certain types of leadership. And if we have time for a bonus question, then maybe we can talk about ways to move forward as a society. So I would encourage the panelists to engage with each other if they see fit. And perhaps we can open up with a question to Julia about how important are personalities of leaders in democratic and non-democratic systems.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for coming to such an early panel in many ways when it comes to time. So we live in an era of political personalization. We know that as political scientists, sociologists, and everyday human beings, it means that we simply pay more attention to personalities than to institutions, values, or for that matter, even facts. So what does that mean for politics? What I'm arguing in my new book on Charm, How Magnetic Personalities Shape Global Politics, is that this means that we have to reckon with a new form of personal magnetism on the global stage. Instead of traditional charisma, which was about bombastic rhetorical performances, think Churchill or de Gaulle, we are dealing with a new form of personal magnetism, which I call charm, which is about proximity to political tribes. So instead of distance from the audience, the politician has to appear as one of us, as our next door neighbor. And if you think about it, it's a really absurd requirement. Why would we want a politician who has a very different lifestyle and political role and responsibility to appear as a person we want to have a beer with, right? And why would we want that person to be authentic in a rather fake environment, which is the media? But again, that's what we require from politicians. This creates, on the one hand, more excitement about politics. On the other hand, I think also really volatile political environment in which charming, charismatic personalities can quickly rise to power and just as quickly then fall down. In this situation, if I go back to the comments by Mr. Zurinda, really the question is moral responsibility and how to perform that well on the global stage.
Mikal, if you could perhaps tell us a bit about what drives in the case of the authoritarian or the dictator, how thoughtfully crafted is their personality? Are there some examples you can bring up as to what they're trying to project to society? What are they trying to tap into?
Yes, of course, personalities is also very important for authoritarian leaders, but in different ways in different countries. It's different from Xi Jinping in China to the dictator of Turkmenistan. I mean, they're different, or Kim Jong-un in North Korea. But for many, since they do not have the authority through the popular will or elections, they have to kind of radiate the authority in other ways, and in many ways to pretend that they have the right to rule over the people and to pretend that they have the will of the people. So they use the image of being often a protector of the people, to protect them from an external or internal enemy, protect them from chaos, like Vladimir Putin is doing in Russia. He's claiming that the Western political systems produce a chaotic political world, and he, in Russia, he has a more stable system. It's not true, of course, but it's important for him to project that image. And you also have a certain type of authoritarian leaders that have come to power through revolutions or a struggle against other authoritarian leaders. And for them it's important to project the image of being the protector of freedom in a way, because they fought against authoritarianism earlier. So they can also claim that they use methods of oppression to protect the people from worse oppression. So for them it's important to be projected and seen as a strong person that cannot be, cannot be torn down or by other forces.
How, maybe to Olivia and Mark, if you guys can describe to me, how effective is the personality of the leader in overcoming poor policies? So can a strong personality outweigh, overshadow, sweep under the rug bad policies? And vice versa, can good policies be completely ruined by just awful personalities?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I'm reminded of the Carnation Revolution in Portugal, where there was a military general, actually, who chose for democracy. So he had all the power, and he chose to be on the right side and said, well, after the revolution, I step down and let the democratic process go. So it occasionally happens, and the military, of course, is a strong force in any authoritarian society, I would think. But generally speaking, I mean, power can be derived from two sources. Either it's institutionalized, strong institutions, independent judiciary, honest police, men and women, or it's personal power. It's either of the two, and it's almost like a seesaw. If you have strong institutional power, nobody really cares about the leaders. So who is the leader of Switzerland now, to name somebody? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's... I'm also reminded of, I'm from the Netherlands, I'm a psychologist. Mark Rutte led the country for many years. He's going now to get the top job at NATO. And he was famous for saying, well, if you want me to have a vision, or if you want to have a vision, you should go to Specsavers, to the eye doctor, if you want vision. So personal power, I think, is... emerges in a vacuum where institutional power is not that strong. And personality, of course, matters in various ways. It's about the leadership style. If you have individuals with strong ambition, dominance, narcissism, that will select for a certain kind of leadership style that is more authoritarian. But you also have other factors at work there. And I think one of the factors that we're studying is, and I think that's often ignored also in the speeches here today and yesterday, it's about the followers. It's not about the leader, because the leader can't go anywhere without followers. So we really have to study what the followers' motivations are, what their needs are, what their anxieties and uncertainties are, sure, if we want to really make progress with understanding authoritarian leadership.
Levy?
I guess I'm going to challenge you. Asked us to talk to each other. I'm going to challenge this a little bit, because I don't think it is the weakness of institutions that produce strong leaders. I believe that the United States has extremely strong institutions of separations of powers, and we still get a highly charismatic and very polarizing and a leader that is very personality based with Donald Trump, and now he's trying to come back. So it's not just that, but certainly I think the key message here is these charismatic leaders that are authoritarian very polarizing. They try to empty out the institutions. And it is the institutions that are there to protect against these leaders. And of course, these leaders are the ones who change the constitution, the election system, the judiciary. So if you recognize some countries in that, you might be in one of them. So yes, I think that's just the one thing that came to mind.
Would you like to respond? Sorry.
Actually, I have a comment that brings together the two perspectives there, okay. So thinking through this question of followers or leaders, okay, I agree with you that actually with strong institutions too. I mean, in the United States, if you have watched the debate, it was about personality ultimately, while the institutions were still in place. But at the same time, I think there was a theme throughout the Budapest Forum, as I think through the various panels, and including the keynote just now, which was about listening, a stronger form of listening. Instead of these big words such as populism, authoritarianism, dictatorship, there was a stronger emphasis even in the mayor's speech at the beginning, Mayor Karácsony, saying, let's win hearts and minds, let's listen to actual concerns of voters and respond back to that, and that's how we will beat populism ultimately, instead of demonizing. And that's the discourse we see in the United States. If you think of the switch from speaking of former President Trump as a threat, simply speaking of him as weird, right? It's a different kind of framing, much more loose and less kind of rigid in vocabulary. So that could be a meeting point, I think, of the 2 points, right? That so leaders are still important even when there are strong institutions, but whether they are successful, whether they are charismatic, charming, and so on, depends on the audience, ultimately, right?
Yeah, no, I fully agree, and you have to understand the audience, and I think it was alluded to in the speech of the former Prime Minister of Slovakia. Economic inequality is actually one of the strongest predictors of the support for a strong leader. And a strong leader, as defined in the World Value Survey, you may know this, one of the questions is, would you like a strong leader who doesn't care about parliament or elections? Mm-hmm. Now that has gone up over the last 30 years tremendously, especially in democratic societies. So there is this need for a strong leader, and I think all the studies suggest to me that it's driven by socio-economic changes, including specifically economic inequality. And why economic inequality? Because the haves want to protect what they have, so they think an authoritarian leader might make them keep their possessions. And of course there is a whole group of have-nots who want to have more but can't get it, and so they also put their trust in an authoritarian leader.
So if we see this trend, we see that, for instance, in this survey, this uptick in a desire for a strong leader to come in. We don't really care how, just get it done. To me, as a journalist, one of the things that always fascinated me was how the authoritarian wraps his authoritarianism in this democratic veneer, right? There was always this desire to have its legitimacy derived from, we are doing this to advance democracy. This is actually the manifestation of a true democracy. And if we're seeing that people are now saying, look, we don't really care about this, we just want somebody to come in and clean up the mess, does this mean we may be seeing a, well, I mean, I guess it kind of speaks for itself, but a more overt rejection of democracy?
Well, is democracy the goal, or is individual ambition, sure, prosperity, and whatever? These are also very important needs that need to be considered. And ultimately, I'm an evolutionary psychologist, so I look at humans as basically still hunter-gatherers who try to find their way in society. Most people want to be left alone. They want to be autonomous. They want to have chances in life, take the chances and whatever. And democracy is probably the best way to get there, but it's a means to an end.
I don't know. I'm very skeptical. I have some research coming out about this recently. So if you look at the World Values Survey came up. If you look at in the United States, that's what we looked at. Support for democracy has not decreased very much over the past couple. You know, among Republicans, there's been like a couple percent decrease. If you just ask them, do you want democracy? The problem is that if you go to the specifics and you ask if the president can ignore Congress? Can the president ignore the courts? Can the president go and jail journalists? Can the president beat up protesters? Once you go to the specific questions, then support for democracy very quickly diminishes. So if you ask people, do you support democracy? The answer is yes. If you ask them, can the president jail journalists and beat up protesters? They are likely to say yes. And this is a topic that gotten a lot of interest lately with the election of Donald Trump. Everybody freaked out about, oh my goodness, this is democracy is deteriorating and dying. But my research shows that this is not a Donald Trump effect. It is to some extent, but it is also an incumbent effect. Like under Obama, Democrats supported Obama ignoring Congress a lot more than under Donald Trump. And under Bush, it was Republicans who supported ignoring Congress. So this is maybe a little bit more universal. I mean, we started caring about this right now. We started studying this right now. And lo and behold, we find that Trump supporters under the Trump administration don't support democracy on these more nuanced dimensions. But if we can go back in time, and the only reason we could go back in time is because we found a survey that studies Latin America where such questions are very prevalent and important, and they happen to include the United States, which people are like, why are you even asking these questions? Turns out it's important.
So if we take this idea here that if we were to do a survey here among the audience and say, do you guys all support democracy? And everybody's like, yeah. And then we start getting down into the nitty-gritty specific policy questions. We see, okay, now there's some deviation from this kind of more democracy. I don't presume this about everybody here. I'm just as an idea. We see how the authoritarian, the populist, their desire might be here to drive polarization on that specific issue. That's the objective. Not to talk about democracy at large, but to create wedge issues, to focus in on wedge issues that steer the conversation away from democracy itself. So my question to you all would be this. How much of a buzzword is polarization? How bad is it, really, in democracies? Is it organic? Is it manufactured? And what's the best way to deal with this?
Well, I mean, in psychology, we study polarization, group polarization, and one of the phenomena that we see is that if there is conflict between groups, then groups on both sides polarize. And the way it works is like this. You have what I think Alice Evans called cultural entrepreneurs, who sort of shift the group towards a more extreme position, because by being seen as the sort of ideal group member, they want to be they become more extreme, and as a result, they take the whole group towards a more extreme version. So this risky shift phenomenon you see, and it's particularly when there is competition or conflict between groups, you see that emerging. So I think group polarization is a real thing. It's happening as we speak. I mean, you can point at the social media, etc. But I mean, I would like to focus on, again, the followers. What are they? What do they want? What are their frustrations? What are their anxieties? And if we focus on that, I think we might get to some sort of solution to the problem of group polarization.
I would add that anybody in the audience who had to endure a dinner with extended family knows that polarization exists, right? And Ben would know that in the New York Times before Thanksgiving, I love those articles. For weeks, there is article after article on how to handle your uncle who will come to Thanksgiving and tell all those stuff that you don't want to hear. Well, on a more serious point, you know, I'm a professor. I know most about higher education in this area, and my next project is on that, polarization in higher education, focusing on how professors can mitigate it with such basic everyday acts of courage, such as saying to a colleague with a different point of view, I would like to have coffee with you, or assigning a reading sounds, you know, normal, but rarely happens with a very different point of view in classrooms, or asking a question in a committee. These are acts of courage, not on the level of Raoul Wallenberg or, you know, Rosa Parks, but these are everyday acts of courage that are crucial to mitigate polarization across the world. I find it very troubling that even in educational spaces, such as higher education, that should be about the open exchange of ideas, it's very open about groupthink and ideological silos and departments not talking to each other. So I'm thinking of mini grants, bringing together professors with different point of views, various kind of direct interventions on that. But I think it's a very real issue, and for anybody who cares not only about democracy, but about human beings, getting along and building a better world, should care about polarization and I think experiences polarization.
Can I just say that what really would help in what you're describing is if our departments actually had diversity of views. Like I understand that sitting down with a colleague who thinks differently might be very difficult in certain universities, and CU is unfortunately one of them, and the New School is also unfortunately one of them. So this would be very difficult. But let me get back. I mean, you asked, what are we going to do about polarization, or is there polarization? Yes, there is. Anybody who went to Thanksgiving, yes, Thanksgiving. But what are we going to do about it? Because research also has shown that the most responsible party for polarization is us, is liberals, because we hate the radical right. And we absolutely hate the radical right. And there's a lot to dislike there. I'll give you that. But we are one of the main drivers of this polarization. And we just had a conference here a couple weeks ago, and one of the shocks for me was that, if you go from the U.S. perspective, I'm Hungarian, but if you look at things, I study the U.S. If you look at things from the U.S. perspective, there's kind of a consensus that polarization is bad. It's something we want to decrease. There's efforts in decreasing. You just described some of these efforts. So there seems to be a consensus about this. Unfortunately, this is not the case in Europe. We were in a room full of European scholars, and we were talking about, well, how should we decrease polarization and all that. Well, why do you want to decrease polarization? I hate the AfD. I want to marginalize them. I want to step on them. And I actually don't mind if Antifa comes and beats the crap out of them when they go out on the street. So I'm sorry. We have to think about this. Do we actually want to depolarize the world? And Kirk Hawkins, the turnout wasn't that great, gave a talk yesterday, and he said, this makes the world the worst place if we're polarized. We're not going to shop in the store because we know that they have a flag out. We're going to go further. We're going to carry the stuff further. We should depolarize. So I'm going to make an appeal to everybody over here is let's have a conversation with people we don't agree with. Let's try to find, I think the grievances on the right are very legitimate. I don't agree with the radical right, but there are legitimate grievances. We talked about economic inequality. We talked about not finding a mate. And so there are legitimate grievances. So let's listen to each other, let's talk to each other, and let's figure out how to move forward in a way that helps everybody.
Yeah, I would like to add something, because part of the question was about whether it was manufactured or organic. And of course, one thing is what happens within democracies, but there has been a lot of talk about influence from troll factories in Russia and from authoritarian regimes trying to influence elections and opinions and try to foster that opposition in the Western world. And there has actually been very little that I know of that show that this actually works very well. That the Russian campaigns to try to create those differences in democracies, they do not. It doesn't work? Oh, I should have it closer. Sorry. There's very little. It seems that the results of these campaigns to show differences in democracies, they do not work very well. They do not. When they try to influence elections in the US or in Western Europe, they do not have very much effect. So I think it's more organic or natural than it is manufactured, at least from the outside. Sure.
Well, if I may add to that, I think we make two kinds of intellectual mistakes when we're thinking about polarization. The one is, as my neighbor says, it is as bad on the liberal side as it is on the conservative side. They just demonize different groups in society. So the liberals have extreme views about wealthy people, for example. The conservatives have very negative views about migrants, for example. And research shows that these forces are about equally strong. So that's the first intellectual mistake that you will have to consider with polarization. And the other intellectual mistake, it's these extreme views, they don't necessarily have a base in reality, because humans fundamentally are not truth seekers. About some things we want to be truthful, like, I don't know, if you find a mushroom in the forest, you want to know if it's poisonous or not. That kind of truth is fine, scientific truth, whatever. But most people don't care about truth. People want to belong to groups. They want to belong to strong groups. And if it requires a little bit of more extreme views to be in a winning coalition, that's okay. We accept that. Most people accept that. So polarization of views is not about who is right or who is wrong, who's accurate or inaccurate, but it is about, am I in a group of people that I think can win this battle for the hearts and minds of people? And there anything can go. Any conspiracy theory, whatever, people swallow it to be part of a successful coalition. And what social media provides is a platform to create coalitions at low cost, because you can put a message on the internet, post something, and you attract followers. You don't even have to go door to persuade people of your extreme view.
It's so interesting to hear what you say, because you speak from the perspective of psychology, I speak from the perspective of media sociology, but we find exactly the same in media research, that identity trumps facts and objective considerations. We see more and more that these kind of tribal identities we all have, even if we deny it, will be stronger. So counteracting that politically is not so much about facts and objectivity and fact-checking. I think that's a mistake to put that center and front. Not that it's not an important aspect, but it will not be enough. We need extremely powerful narratives, counter-campaigns of communicating values, which also focus on everyday concerns of people. And then the other thing we increasingly see is the importance of patriotic symbols. If you think of the presidential debates, it's not an accident that the vice president was wearing the flag pin, and she wears it in every setting. And we have seen all the flags at the Democratic Convention, so that's a mistake I believe the left made, and it's getting corrected in many countries, which is reclaiming the patriotic symbols and communicating that these are symbols that represent all of us in a nation, not just a particular political party.
All of this is absolutely fascinating to me as somebody who does not have incredibly hard positions on pretty much anything. I realize now that as I get older, that there is an expectation towards me to have an opinion on something. And I'm seen as being awkward where people come to me with these divisive issues, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I've never thought about it. I never read anything. Like, and that's not the hill that I'm going to die on, but it's as though there is this expectation that you do die on that hill. I would notice, though, and please correct me if I'm wrong in the audience, we'd like to open up to you in a moment here. Well, we've heard of liberals. We've heard of the far right. We haven't heard of the left in this conversation. And, maybe we can get some questions from the audience to open that up. Would anybody have any questions generally on the topic? We have a hand in the back there.
Just wait for the mic for the interpreters, please.
If we could have the questions be brief, please. We're kind of pressed with time here.
Hello everyone, Murat Somer. I'm a professor of politics at Özyeğin University in Istanbul and going to be a Democracy and Development Fellow here at CU this year. Thank you for all these remarks. You mostly portrayed strong leadership in a negative light, as a means of authoritarianism, maybe populism, etc. But don't we need a strong democratic leadership, especially in the contemporary world, when we not only face dangers of rising authoritarianism and democratic decay, as many people believe, including myself, but also we have pressing problems such as climate change, immigration, economic inequality that was emphasized this morning. These are difficult issues that need strong coalitions, but also strong political leverage, political power, political mobilization, because it's also not, I work on polarization, and it's also not surprising that these are polarizing issues. Actually, we should have strong opinions on a lot of issues, because there are many difficult choices that we need to make in the contemporary world in order to secure our future. So what about Roosevelt? What about Kennedy? And you mentioned left. So I would say, actually, what would you say about the need for maybe strong democratic leadership, and what would that look like, perhaps, in your opinion?
That's a great question, and I may even just tack something onto that. Leadership, political leadership, even in liberal democracies, I mean, politics is a dirty game. It's not as though this happens in a vacuum, you know, that all of a sudden you walk into a building and everybody is saintly and whatnot. It reminds me of this quote. A California legislator, Jesse Unruh, once said that if you can't take a lobbyist's money and sleep with his mistress, then you don't, and vote against him, then you don't belong in politics. So I would just throw this out there.
Well, I think, I mean, in a way it's a definitional issue, because we define strong leadership as somebody who doesn't care about parliament and elections. So in a way, strong democratic leadership, I think we're all probably in favor of that, but when we talk about strong leaders, we often mean authoritarian as in not caring for democracy. So that's a definitional issue to some extent. But what we see in all our studies that we do, that the kind of crisis that you mentioned, climate change, refugee crisis, whatever, increases the support for authoritarian leadership. And why? Because we need direction, we need decisiveness, we expect it in our leaders, and if that means that they will not have to go through parliament, then that's fine. I mean, we see it in Hungary as well, in Budapest with the flooding. It's the sort of leaders who put on their boots and put the sandbags out, and what these kind of leaders then do is perpetuate the crisis, because they find all kinds of ways to put a narrative down for we're in a perpetual crisis. So are they really crisis? Climate change a crisis? Is it? I mean, it's a long-term problem, of course. But by playing up the crisis level, and I think the media have a lot to ask to be responsible for that as well. We're actually playing in the cards of the authoritarian leader, whereas if you sit down and reflect, you think, yeah, climate change is a real problem. I mean, it's probably going to affect the generation afterwards, but is it an immediate crisis that needs a leader who puts on his boots and put out the sandbags and tries to curb the flooding? I don't think that's what we need.
Let me just add to that, because I, of course, agree that it's about definition. We call a dictator a strong man. But it's also true that we need strong political leaders in democratic countries to stand up to strong leaders in dictatorships. We need to have the moral integrity and to have secure stances on politics to do that. So I think you're absolutely right that democracies also need strong leaders.
There is a famous saying, which is that if you want to have a friend in Washington, get a dog. And that is very much referring back to your comment on, the possibilities of that. But to address exactly the question, yes, of course, we need strong leaders on our political side. I don't think we argue against that. But I agree with you, Ben, that we may not need strong opinion on everything. I certainly teach my students that it's okay to say, I don't know. That we don't need conviction all the time. And I think that was a mistake to train them in a way that it always has to be some kind of firm decision right there without having the context, without having a background on every issue.
This segues with the very important question that was asked, but You know, we talk about leadership here. We talked about it in kind of the more authoritarian, non-democratic sense, and then we had this question about leadership in the democratic sense. Why is it bad to have a bad leader? One of the things we kind of missed here was in the non-democratic settings, the people who are trying to champion the democratic processes, who are pushing back against the authoritarians. The caliber of leadership that requires, the caliber of character that requires is immense. And with regards to this, and this is kind of a forward-looking question here, the authoritarians, the non-democratic people or leaders, the way they treat that battlefield, there's this huge asymmetry, right? They have all the tools. They can do things that you couldn't even do in a democratic setting to their adversaries. And on the flip side, the people who are trying to champion a more democratic process have even less tools. The costs they pay are so much more important. We see in the case of military conflicts, you know, a huge body of philosophical thought dealing with like just war theory, right? What are the bounds? What are you not allowed and not allowed to do? In the case of the pro-democratic people in an authoritarian system, should they be allowed to operate with a different set of rules? And let's go like one step closer, because this is a very important theme, you know, not just in Hungary, but elsewhere. To what extent do individuals, democratic states, do they have a responsibility? Should they be allowed to support those efforts in such situations?
Well, I can start by saying that if you use illiberal means to overthrow a dictator, it usually ends by installing a new dictatorship. So it's not really a very good idea in the first place. But you end up, it's a dilemma, because it's very hard to fight against someone with a very oppressive toolbox with lots of tools that you cannot use. So you are at a disadvantage, and there's no obvious solution to that. But what I mean from the liberal societies, from the democratic countries, one solution is to have some form of engagement. One example is in the 60s there was a discussion about inviting Soviet students to the US. And the ones who opposed that, they said that no, they'll just send the KGB agents. But they ended up inviting a couple of students, and of course they were KGB agents. But the same KGB agents went back to the Soviet Union again, and were some of the most important people opening up the society in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. So you can use democratic and open means to contribute to undermine an authoritarian state.
It's interesting. Anthropologists are studying these small-scale societies where our democratic values and egalitarian values were basically formed. And if you look at the strategies that these small-scale societies, hunter-gatherer societies, have to level the playing field, it starts with gossip and ridicule. So they ridicule their leader, satire, criticizing them in a sort of public domain. But if that doesn't help, then the sanctions will gradually increase to exclusion from the group, from the tribe, which means effectively a death penalty, or indeed forming a coalition to kill the tyrant. And that sort of, 20-30% of males in these societies die because they are overzealous. They're dominating, they want to dominate, and they don't tolerate that. And so this is, of course, what we see. We shouldn't condone it, but in democratic societies, in the US we have that now with Trump and the 2 attacks on his life that have been taken place. That is an outcome that we may not desire, but it is part of the power struggles that are taking place within a human society where there are people trying to dominate and a coalition of weaklings who are ultimately a stronger force, if they're also allowed to carry weapons, of course, to carry something like this out. So this is really a significant threat, but it is a leveling mechanism. It is a way to stop tyrants and dominant individuals taking over the group.
I would just say that I have a hard time answering your question in kind of abstract terms. I think it will depend on the particular context and historical setting in terms of how you address, for instance, an illiberal regime, if you ever get the chance to change it over time. But there was one thing that I was really heartened by at the Budapest Forum, listening to the various panels, which was increasing levels of collaboration between and among players. So to mention two examples. First panel, mayors, collaborating on a host of issues, the mayor of Tirana and the mayor of Budapest coming together on green initiatives and helping each other. That is one of these kind of network that you mentioned, democratic forces coming together. And another example was the journalism panel, which said, well, we are operating under all these difficult circumstances. We are under pressure, financial, political, and so on, and we are sharing resources. And that's how we fight.
Anybody else? Levy, would you like to chime in?
I mean, if I didn't know you better, I would think that you're trying to advertise an upcoming panel. I'm 95% sure it's upcoming on what Poland is doing right now. But I mean, all I can say is this has been an ongoing and extremely difficult conversation in Hungary before the previous election, when we had illusions of potentially electorally ousting Viktor Orbán. We know how that went. So I don't believe the left will be able to achieve under the very difficult circumstances that with the institutional overhauls that the current regime has put in place 10 years ago already, in any kind of major landslide victory. So that means that we'll be dealing with the institutions that are extremely entrenched to protect the regime's interests. The question of, can we do something about it? Can we change the constitution with just a majority? Can we just throw out these institutions with just a majority that require 2/3, 3/4 of majority? Is an important question. It's a legitimate question. And I think looking at Poland and what they do and how successful they are is extremely important in this conversation. And that is where we have to be very closely watching to see what tools work and don't work. And I believe there's an upcoming panel about that, please, Peter. Yes, so just to advertise that a little bit.
Mikal, did you have anything, or?
No, I don't have any.
So, I had a final question. It actually ties to Alice's topic, so maybe the organizers will let us set up another panel later, because I really want to get into that. I think there's a lot of insight we can glean from that, but I'm not going to go there right now. We had one question from the audience. We have like 2 minutes left, so.
I'm Esther Nagy, I'm a local politician here, so I loved your comments about politicians, how they should behave. I wanted to comment on that I don't, I don't think, I'm on a district level, so I'm not on a high level. I wanted to comment on that I don't think this hate can be symmetrically looked at, because in Hungary in 2002, it was Orbán who started this extreme polarization, and actually the extreme right taps into this polarization. So there are very different interests, and I think from the AfD, most democratic-minded liberal people are rather afraid of than hate them. So hate is in itself rather on the other side, and sorry to say that it's not. I also, you know what I want to say. So because you were talking that it's a symmetric thing, we hate conservatives in the U.S.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. That's all Levy.
Not you,
That was
not
all
you.
him.
I know, not you personally, but there was this dichotomy in this. So I think it's there is one side that capitalize on it, and the other side who tries to outbalance it. Thank you.
So
it's my feeling in Hungary. Sorry, it's
okay. So let me give you some some of the most basic tenets of social psychology is that we view the in-group differently than the out-group. So when we look at ourselves, we understand the nuances, we see that we can contextualize things a lot better. But when we don't look at the in-group, when we look at the out-group, they're all the same, they're all bad, etc. And what I'm hearing from your comment is exactly that we are very good at contextualizing, that this is not hate, there's some nuance here, there's some more understanding. So I'm just saying, be careful. We need to move past these things and really listen to each other. That's my plea.
No, I fully endorse this. So, I mean, again, it's the research that suggests that the prejudice and the discrimination is equally strong on both sides, and we just have to admit that we are talking about the same thing, essentially. We're doing the same thing as liberals, lefties, as people are on the right. We're just targeting the other group, and that kind of self-reflection, I think, is really needed to get past this and work towards solutions.
I would like to thank you all very much. We've run out of time. Thank you for the questions. Thank you to this fabulous panel. Look forward to seeing all of you during the break.